So welcome everyone. Good evening. It's wonderful to have all of you here at the, I would say, towards the end of a very busy week for many of us. So thank you for your fidelity, and I totally understand you, because for the panel we're going to have this afternoon, I wouldn't have missed it. So thank you for being here. We have the honor to have with us the rector of the Gregorian, Father Mark Lewis, who I invite to say a few words of welcoming. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. At the end of last year, I suggested to Father Di Lucio that he could take my place for the institutional greetings this year, which was good because then I was not feeling well at the beginning of the school year. And then today he had an operation, so he's not able to be with us this evening. So I'm actually the substitute for my substitute, which is an interesting moment. As a result, nothing is prepared, so I just simply want to say welcome. This is one of those events that you all have heard me say before. It's, I think, one of the most important events that we have at the school, usually one of the most interesting. I want to greet His Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel to the Holy See, Bishop Vito, who's an old friend, who's back. Obviously, Aldegon Brennickmeier, who is always the heart of this event as well. It's wonderful to have you all here. It's, again, a wonderful event, and I won't say any more because I'm not prepared. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and I will invite Professor Massimo Gargiulo, the director of I always get very, very confused with titles, but
okay.
You'll tell us.
We know each other. So I am the supposed substitute of the substitute of the substitute. So here we are. Okay. So following the International Conference on Nostra Aetate, which has just concluded yesterday, we are happy to go on in deepening this important, very important document. And we do that with this 24th annual Brennickmeier lecture entitled From Adversaries to Fellow Travelers, Visions and Metaphors for the Future of Jewish-Christian Dialogue. Today's meeting aims to explore some of the words that have historically shaped the relationship between Jews and Christians, examining their possible meanings with an eye to how, in the future, they might become part of new ways through which Jews and Christians can understand and know one another. This will take place through the contribution of 4 internationally renowned scholars who are directly engaged in Jewish-Christian dialogue: Mary Boyce, Amy Jill Levine, Philip Cunningham, and Jonathan Moss. Furthermore, this meeting is part of the activities of a research group that has been working together in the last few years around this meta-question. What is the religious meaning of the Jewish identity of Jesus for Christians and for Jews today and for their contemporary interrelationship? This project is sponsored by the Institute for Jewish-Catholic Relations of St. Joseph University in Philadelphia, has the Cardinal Bea Center for Judaic Studies here at the Pontifical Gregorian University, the Center for Intercultural Theology and the Study of Religions at the Universität Salzburg, and the Center for Christian Jewish Learning at Boston College. It brings together more than 20 scholars from around the world, Christians of different confessions, and Jews. We are really delighted and honored to have them here with us and thank them for the contribution they will make, together with the audience, to today's discussion. Thank you for being here. I also wish to thank our staff for helping to organize such meaningful moments of study and dialogue, especially valuable in an international context that, as I said in introduction to the other conference, has recently exposed that dialogue to tensions, misunderstanding, and even ruptures. The special words of thanks, I go along with the rector, goes to Aldegon Brennickmeier, thanks to whom today's meeting has been made possible, and who actively supports the Cardinal Bea Center and its always enriching exchanges with the Center for the Study of Christianity at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, that is our partner in organizing today's lecture, and whose director, Jonathan Moss, will have the privilege to hear this evening. I also want to thank the students of the Cardinal Bea Centers for attending this 2-day conference, not 2 days, 4 days really, conference and meetings, and also the colleagues, both of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, the Presidente of the Biblical Institute, Peter Dubowski, and the other colleagues that are here. And of course, it makes me enormous pleasure to have here Etienne Vetou, who has been running the Cardinal Bea Center so well for 6 years. And thanks, Elena Dini, Dottoressa Elena Dini, for moderating this session with the kind of spirit that you know you have. So thank you very much. Have a good conference.
Thank you so much, Professor Gargiulo. The word I was looking for was pro-director of the Cardinal Bea Center. So I think that the panel we have in front of us today is going to give us really the chance of a word that Professor Gargiulo used earlier, which I really like at the end of this, once again, a busy week celebrating the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. And the word you used is deepening. I think we're really, at this point, we really look for in-depth conversation about the future, about the present, and about also the past. I'm sure that we are going to have this 3-dimension in the interventions that we're going to hear. So enough for me. We'll have actually a pretty short time because we're going to spend the next hour and a half together, and you will be hearing from our 4 speakers. Then at the end of the 4 interventions, we'll have some time for them to interact with each other, to ask questions, to share maybe concerns about each other's presentations, and thinking together about where to go next. But something else that we really look forward is to open the floor to you. So we will make sure that we have enough time for that, because the future of Nostra Aetate is definitely not only relying on this side, is really in your hands. And our 4 speakers are so good that they also decide the order, because they know very well what they're going to say. So even the order has been really carefully thought in order to lead us through the conversation. So we will get started with Philip Cunningham. Dr. Philip Cunningham is Professor of Theology and co-director of the Institute for Jewish-Catholic Relations of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. Specializing in theologies of the Christian and Jewish, and especially the Catholic-Jewish relationship, is the author or editor or over a dozen books and dozens of articles or book chapters. He has served as president and honorary president of the International Council of Christians and Jews, and is also the webmaster of the Internet resource Dialogica of the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you much, Elena. Let me begin by saying that I really consider it an honor to be here and to talk about the theme of visions and metaphors at this place and at this time. And you all know what I mean when I say that. I want to offer these thoughts about visions. And to me, visions, I'm going to zero in on that word, are a very personal thing. And so I think my comments are sort of by way of reflections, and I want to draw upon my personal experiences and memories in visioning with you. Believe it or not, I was in Catholic grammar school at the time of the council. I remember news stories about Nostra Aetate, although I didn't appreciate at that age exactly what it was all about, but it made big news, for sure. I also remember an iconic moment 25 years ago this year when St. John Paul II inserted his prayer of penitence into the Western Wall, the same prayer that he had offered at St. Peter's Basilica in this city 10 days before being in Jerusalem. In that prayer, he asked God's forgiveness for the sins of Christians against the, quote, people of the covenant, end quote. And as a form of penance or penitence, he committed the Catholic Church to, quote, genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant, end quote. Now, I've come to understand that covenant is not an object. It's rather a living relationship. And that is why in the Bible, Hebrew scriptures in particular, often present the metaphor, imperfect though it may be, of covenant as the relationship between parent and child or between husband and wife. And these metaphors from our human experience are meant to convey a deep interpersonal relationship. Covenant is not an object you possess or can steal or take away or give. Now, the post-conciliar popes have employed the term covenant in important ways. Quick review. St. John Paul II referred on many occasions to the covenantal life between the Jewish people and God, such as when he spoke of Jews as, quote, the present-day people of the covenant concluded with Moses, end quote, or as, quote, partners in a covenant of eternal love which was never revoked, end quote. And I'll just note that that's one of, he said that this idea perhaps 30 times over the course of his pontificate. And this one, the quote that I just read, speaking of a covenant of eternal love, particularly grabs me because of the relational nature of what he's talking about. And text just vanished from my screen, but it has returned. Pope Francis, in his apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, after noting that the church holds the, quote, Jewish people in special regard because of their covenant with God, end quote, went on to say, quote, God continues to work among the people of the old covenant and to bring forth treasures of wisdom which flow from their encounter with his word, end quote. I just note parenthetically that as an apostolic exhortation, sort of summarizing many of the intervening years, that's the highest level of magisterial authority of a document since Nostra Aetate. So that's particularly significant. So I want to suggest, therefore, that a phrase that neatly summarizes post-conciliar Catholic teaching about the relationship of the Church to the Jewish people is that we are co-covenanting companions, or, if you prefer, fellow covenantors with God. We each walk through time, I'm conscious of the word travelers in the title here, we each walk through time in a living relationship with the Holy One that is mediated in different ways through the interrelated but distinct mediations of the Torah for Jews and Christ for Christians. Therefore, there are many resonances between our ways of walking with God, we Jews and Christians. We can help one another in understanding God better by comparing our experiences of God. We can also help each other live out our very similar covenantal responsibilities to that Holy One with whom we covenant. Seeing Jews and Christians as co-covenanting companions resonates with the rabbinic practice of joint study as chavruta partners. It is the concept underlying Joshua Kaufman's sculpture, here it's enlarged, Synagoga and Ecclesia in Our Time, which was commissioned for the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate 10 years ago. And it reimagines the negative medieval portrayal of the church triumphing over the synagogue. This sculpture accords with the vision of Nostra Aetate. It also envisioned Pope Benedict XVI's desire that Jews and Catholics should study sacred text together. This vision has certain consequences that I want to quickly note. If we who are Catholics understand Jews as fellow covenantors, then sincerity demands certain actions on our part in the areas of worship, scriptural interpretation, and the formation, educationally, of all Catholics, especially teachers and preachers on all levels and in all parts of the world. As can be empirically demonstrated, though I don't have the time to do it, through opinion surveys, textbook studies, studies of homilies, and studies of formation programs in seminaries and theologates, I have to say that I fear the Catholic community has not effectively implemented the directive from the 1985, so this is the 40th anniversary of that, Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews document notes. Got to take a deep breath. Notes on the correct way to present Jews and Judaism in preaching and catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church. That text said that the Jews and Judaism should not occupy an occasional and marginal place in catechesis. Their presence there is essential and should be organically integrated, end quote. We really haven't done that. As a glance at least in the United States, any national or diocesan catechetical directories will show Jews and Judaism are really kind of not there. On the other hand, there's one reason for this is that the kind of systemic reform educationally that is needed takes time, especially given the profound theological issues that Nostra Aetate raises that we are still unpacking. Textbook publishers really don't want to publish things that are not quite settled. So there is some explanation there. But let me conclude, I think more importantly, if I may say, with some personal testimony. I have been blessed to have had extended opportunities to study with Jews. Some have become deep, deep friends. I have perceived the Holy One in these encounters, in the words, in the lives, in the traditions, and in the witness of these Jews. I am no longer the same Catholic than I was before. This is because, to me, Jews and Christians are indeed co-covenanting companions. And it means that our dialogues together, and I mean dialogue in the most profound sense of that word, is a sacred undertaking. And that when we dialogue, we create a sacred space in which the Holy Spirit is present, as Pope Francis has said, and it is also clear to me that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is also present, as we see in a couple of rabbinic texts that speak about what happens when scholars discuss Torah together. So that, I believe, is the image and concept that Nostra Aetate points toward. So let us perhaps seek together the Holy Spirit and the Shekhinah. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Philip, for inviting us into this dimension, this image of co-covenanting companions. I think I really enjoyed thinking about the covenant, definitely not as an object, as you said, but as a living relationship, and this idea of connecting it to the traditional Chavruta, of sitting next to each other and getting into that holy space that I think we need really to cherish, protect, and make sure that we have in our lives. Thank you so much. And right now we're moving on to our second speaker of today, Professor Jonathan Moss. He heads, as we heard, the Department of Comparative Religion at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and directs that university's Brenninkmeier Veran Center for the Study of Christianity. He works on the histories and comparative study of the Abrahamic religions and on the relations between them in the Mediterranean basin during the first millennium. Jonathan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Elena, for the kind words of introduction. Thank you, Massimo, for the invitation, and thank you all for staying on with us for this final act. Jewish-Christian dialogue is a subspecies of the general category of dialogue between people belonging to different groups. To think of new visions and metaphors for this dialogue, I propose we return to one of the most foundational biblical texts of interpersonal relations, Leviticus 19, the heart of the so-called Holiness Code. Leviticus 19 instructs us to love like ourselves two kinds of people. Everybody knows the first kind, but I want to focus on both kinds tonight. Two kinds of people, the Rea and the Ger. We will look into these words more deeply. Rea is usually translated as, what would you say? Neighbor. Love your neighbor like yourself. And Ger is usually translated as stranger or alien or resident alien. Not alien, somebody from outer space, but alien, yes, a stranger. I will argue tonight that both of these translations are wrong, and in fact, I will suggest to reverse them. Understanding the correct meaning of these two important biblical Hebrew words and the commands of love connected to them offer us what I think might be a way forward in Jewish-Christian relations. So let's start with the two love commandments of which I speak. So verse 18, very famous, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your Rea as yourself. I am the Lord. And then a little later in the same chapter, when a Ger resides with you in your land, you shall not take advantage of the Ger. The Ger who resides with you shall be to you as, and here is another word that I cannot get into, but I, for the moment, will translate it as the in-group person among you. You shall love the Ger as yourself, for you were Gerim in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God. We are commanded to love the Rea, who is our Rea, right? Notice it says your Rea. He belongs to our people. We are warned against taking vengeance or holding grudges against him. And we are also commanded to love the Ger. Notice not your Ger, but the Ger, who lives beside us in our land. For we were Gerim in the land of Egypt. We are not warned against begrudging the Ger, we are warned against taking advantage of him or her. So, who are these two people that we must love? Who is the Rea and who is the Ger? The Rea, as I mentioned before, is often translated into English as neighbor. This is under the influence of the ancient Jewish-Greek translation of Leviticus, the Septuagint, which gives a Greek word, plesion, that means one nearby or neighbor. That Greek translation influenced, in turn, Paul in Galatians and Romans, and the authors of the Synoptic Gospels, who, when speaking of love of one's fellow, use the word plesion, which in English is rendered neighbor, understandably enough. To offer continuity between the Levitical love command and the New Testament love commands, modern Christian translators, from Luther onwards, maybe even before that, usually translate Rea as neighbor. But Jewish translators, with the exclusion of the Septuagint, regularly translate Rea not as neighbor, but as friend. For this is one of the most common meanings of the Hebrew word. In Hebrew, Rea does not normally mean neighbor. Interestingly, Jerome, who sought to stay close to the Hebrew text, gives amicus here, and has no problem writing proximus in the New Testament passages. Douay Rheims follows him, but other Catholic translators, interestingly, do not. And they give neighbor, including the modern Italian, modern Arabic. That's not necessarily Catholic, but you see the information in front of you. So what exactly does this word Rea mean? An examination of its uses shows that it is a friend, a spouse, male and female, bride and groom, also just another, one's counterpart or one's fellow. I think the best way to translate it nowadays in the English language is this wonderful English phrase, one's significant other. Okay? I don't know if we have that in other languages, maybe we do, but that's a beautiful phrase, a significant other. Thus, in a way, it's actually very close to the word alien in the etymological sense of the Latin word, denoting otherness, alienus. I give you an example from a letter from Pliny. So rea thus means alien in the etymological sense, not somebody who is totally strange to you, but somebody who is not you, is other than you, but is significant in that sense. You love them because they are not you, because you see something different in them. You see their face to face to yours. And that is why they are significant to you, because they are part of your people. As the verse states, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your rea as yourself. So that is one category of people Leviticus 19 commands us to love. People who are significant to us because they are part of our people. And it is for this reason that they are called your rea, not just the rea, but there's a personal relationship going on here. The other category we are commanded to love is the ger, who is introduced, I remind us, as follows. When a ger resides with you in your land, you shall not take advantage of the ger. The ger who resides with you shall be to you as an in-group person among you. You shall love the ger as yourself, for you were gerim in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Ger comes from the word gar in Hebrew, which means to live, to dwell. The ger is defined by the fact that he or she lives next to you. In other words, your neighbor. Etymologically, neighbor means precisely that, comes from the word living next to. Unlike the rea, the ger's otherness is not naturally significant to you. It is not a significant other. The ger is not an inherent part of your frame of reference. Gerim are not part of your people, just as you were not part of the Egyptian people whom you lived next to. Thus, the ger is not yours. The ger is the ger. You have no kinship or special connection to him. He is the ger, not your ger. And yet, precisely because of the lack of obvious connection, we are commanded to love the ger, to make sure not to take advantage of them, to seek a connection of love that's not based on kinship, but on care. We all have these two kinds of relationships in our lives. Re'im, people who are significant others, family, spouse, friends, community members, work colleagues, co-religionists, and gerim, people whom we see and encounter because they inhabit our neighborhood, our world, our country, but they are not significant others. We are commanded to love both types of people because with both we run the risk of doing to them the opposite of love. But the risk stems from different reasons. Because we have expectations of our re'im, we run the risk of holding grudges against them when they fail our expectation. Because the gerim do not belong to our in-group, whom we are programmed to look after, we run the risk of taking advantage of them, of not seeing them as fellow human beings. The latter risk is especially high when, as in the two cases mentioned in Leviticus 19, Israelite society and Egyptian society, the ger is a minority. There is a main people and a separate cultural, ethnic, religious minority that lives next door to them. In such situations, the minority has no choice but to notice the majority. They need to do so in order to survive. But the majority can easily ignore the minority. This is why the Torah commands the majority to love and care for the minorities, to see them. When applied to Jewish-Christian relations, I think Leviticus 19's twofold love command holds two lessons. One, location. Jews and Christians occupy different roles in Israel and in the Christian or historically Christian world. In Israel, the Jews are the majority, and thus the Christians, and the Muslims as well, are the gerim, whom the Jews, being the majority, are commanded to love, care, and take interest in. In the Christian countries, or historically Christian countries, the Jews and Muslims are the gerim, whom the Christians are commanded to love, care, and take interest in. The message is one that got lost over the generations, as both Jews and Christians mostly forgot what the word ger means. The Septuagint translates ger as proselyte. The rabbis understand it as convert, thus someone who was outside in the past but now is part of the in-group. Both Jewish and Christian tradition have mostly erased the ger's outsider status. We must reclaim the original message of biblical gerism. And in so doing, we must always remember how location makes all the difference in defining who is the ger. The ger is our neighbor. Where or she is physically in relation to me is fundamental, and it changes. That's my first lesson, and now my second and final lesson, and I will be done. Asymmetry. I may be wrong about this, but it appears to me that besides the majority-minority difference I was just talking about, there is also a key theological difference. I have come to understand and appreciate this difference over the years I've been studying Jewish and Christian history and theology and engaging in Jewish-Christian dialogue. It is something that may make some people here feel awkward, but I have come to believe that it might be true. Put simply, Jews are significant others to Christians, while Christians are not significant others to Jews. This is especially true in Israel, but valid also outside of Israel. Jews and Judaism are an essential part of Christianity, while Christianity is not an essential part of Judaism. Given this difference, it might be more accurate to say that Jews, for Christians, no matter where they are actually never gerim. They are always re'im. Okay? Jews to Christians are always re'im, are always significant others. And significant others we can sometimes love and sometimes hold grudges against and sometimes take revenge against. But Christians, for Jews, might always be gerim. Understanding this asymmetry, but realizing that the love command applies equally in both cases, might be a key to advancing relations between these two groups. If we accept that to Jewish theology Christians are always gerim no matter where located, this would go against lesson 1 that I just talked about above, about location. So there's some tension between these two lessons. I'll need to think more about this. Perhaps you and you can all help me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Moss. Thank you for giving us work to do. So right now we have a task, and we'll look forward to the conversation we will have. And I highly appreciate you walking us through this linguistic dimension and helping us understanding how relevant it is. How generally relevant are words we use, what is the theological meaning we give to them, and also sometimes this, can we stand these asymmetries that you were mentioning? Are we okay? Are we good with calling each other in different ways? Is it inherently wrong or not? Thank you so much for helping us through this challenging but definitely inspiring way. So right now we already have on the podium Professor Dr. Amy G. Levine, Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at the Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, and University Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies, Mary Jane Warren, Professor of Jewish Studies Emerita at Vanderbilt. He's also Vice President of the Catholic Biblical Association of America for 2025-2026. She's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Studiorum Novi Testamenti Societas, and holder of the Salisbury Prize for Jewish-Christian Relations and the Archbishop of Canterbury's Walter Award for Interfaith Cooperation. Professor Levine publishes widely in Jewish-Christian relations and Jesus and the New Testament in a historical context. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Typically, as the old saying goes, if you put two Jews in a room, you will get three opinions. Yoni and I are looking at the same topics. We come to complementary but not quite the same results. I'm going to argue for neighbor as neighbor. And I think we're both right. Jewish-Christian relations have been described by a number of different metaphors, none of which is ideal. Typically, branches from the same tree. This comes from Paul's epistle to the Romans, chapter 11, the branches on the olive tree. But the problem with that is Paul's olive tree has non-Messianic Jews prior to the return of Jesus either bent or broken off, which is not a position I'd like to be. So the idea is not great. Or we have elder and younger brothers. This is a model popularized by St. Pope John Paul II. Is that right, St. Pope? Okay. In his comments at Rome Synagogue in 1986, and the model appears also in Alan Siegel's 1989 publication, Rachel's Children. However, biblical elder brothers typically get replaced. Isaac replaces Ishmael in the Jewish and Christian traditions. Jacob replaces Esau. Judah replaces his older brothers, as does David. Perez replaces Zerah. Solomon replaces the dead older brother. If you're dating anybody in the biblical tradition, go for the younger son. Jews and Christians both see themselves as Jacob, the beloved son, and the other is Esau. True, in some Jewish sources, there's reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, but Jacob's still the one who's really loved. The sibling model also falters on the prediction to Rebekah in Genesis 25, where pregnant Rebekah is told, 2 nations are in your womb. I mean, who needs this? 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. And the sibling model also falters on Romans 9:13, which is a citation from Malachi. I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. And then we've got children of Abraham, very popular these days. Jews trace our ancestry to Abraham and Sarah. According to Genesis 12, God promises Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So children of Abraham, pretty good. Paul taught that Gentile followers of Jesus were also children of Abraham. Romans 4 speaks of sharing the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. And Galatians 3:6 states, those who believe are the descendants of Abraham, or the children of Abraham. That's all fine. But there are problems with the children of Abraham model, including the different roles that Abraham plays in both Jewish and Christian tradition. And also, if we're going to speak about children of Abraham, we also have to speak about Islam. So if we're just speaking about Judaism and Christianity, half the family, or at least a third of the family, goes missing, and I don't want people to be missing in this family. And finally, children of Abraham bothers me, the feminist, because I want to know where the women are, like children of Sarah and children of Hagar. So I'm not thrilled with children of Abraham. The category friend has potential, but it also comes with its own baggage, like Micah chapter 7, who says, put no trust in a friend and have no confidence in a loved one. So friend is good, but friends are iffy. And friends can sometimes lack the proximity that Yoni talked about. So I want to argue for neighbor. Any metaphor will necessarily be limiting, and metaphors may not work in all locations. What works in the United States might not work in Italy, might not work in Germany, might not work in Jerusalem, but we got to start somewhere. Metaphors can, however, become helpful sometimes, and they may help to advance discussion. So in an earlier article I wrote on the biblical categories of neighbor, so rea and plesion, pace, what Yoni said, and the ger, the stranger, the alien, or perhaps today, the migrant. If you were Gerim in the land of Egypt, you knew what it was like to be in a land not your own where you are vulnerable. So connotations are going to change meaning over time. And even if we can get to the etymology, that might not tell us how the word is being used today. In this early article, I followed an essay by Michael Fagenblatt titled The Concept of Neighbor in Jewish and Christian Ethics. This is produced in something called the Jewish Annotated New Testament, which I would recommend to everybody. In which Michael argued, and then I took off from there, that what happens in the New Testament is the category of neighbor broadens from an ethnic and land-connected category to include all the followers of Jesus, regardless of ethnicity, and how the category of the other, stranger, if you wish, alien, who is to be welcomed, drops out of Christian discourse. Jesus says in a lovely parable, sometimes called the parable of the sheep and the goats. Is this familiar to you? Sheep and goats? Okay. If it's not, and you get to heaven and there's a sheep line and a goat line, get into the sheep line. Don't ask, just get into the sheep line. Jesus says in this parable, you have to welcome the stranger, the one who's not you, the one who's vulnerable, the one who comes from the outside. But generally what happens in the New Testament is the other, the not Jesus follower, either becomes the person to be converted, so the potential convert, or an infidel or an apostate. And the category for the early church of being outside the Jesus-believing group becomes a problem. And the same thing happens in Judaism, as Yoni pointed out, where the category of ger gets translated as proselyte. So the stranger then becomes the convert, and then there's still no room for the person on the outside. I think the category neighbor might be helpful here, and here particularly in English translations. Leviticus 19:18 in the English translation, most English translations, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, or you shall love your neighbor who is a fellow human being like you. And I think that can be expanded to speak of Jewish-Christian relations. For Jews, we can expand the category of neighbor from one of ethnicity, one like us, to include people who live near us, who share texts. While the Tanakh is not the Old Testament, side note, I think Old Testament is a perfectly good term to use as long as we remember that old is bedrock, foundational, and fabulous, and not something outdated or to be put up on the shelf. We share individual books. We pray the same prayers like the Psalms. We worship the same God revealed in Torah, and we more or less follow a similar code of behavior. And such categories fit the environmental sense of neighbors, people who live near each other who have to follow more or less the same rules. Granted, neighborly proximity is not the same in Peru as it is in New York, but with global communication, we're all increasingly neighbors anyway. The category neighbor living in the same religious environment fits the Catholic recognition that Jews are still under covenant with God, and thus for Catholics, Jews don't fit into category of heretic or infidel or in fact other religions. We're our own thing. We're part of that same internal group. Christians may read Paul's comment in Romans 11 that all Israel will be saved, and although this is debated in the academy, I think when Paul says Israel, he means Jews, because as he says in Romans 11:29, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Catholics may conclude that that means that Jews eventually come to worship Jesus at some point, like when he comes back. I think that's okay. We're not there yet, and we don't know. But in this reading, Jesus remains the Savior for Christians, and I think that's an important point. We should not sacrifice the particulars of our own tradition on the altar of interfaith sensitivity. So if the church wants to say that Jesus is the universal Savior, I think the church should say that, and we Jews might say, well, we'll see. That's fine. The category of neighbor avoids the asymmetrical relationship of stranger language because in a dialogue context, and here I'm talking about dialogue, I want asymmetry to go away. I don't want to come in as the Jewish minority and the Christian majority, or in Israel the reverse, because I think in dialogue we have to be equals. So we come into dialogue as AJ and Mark, or AJ and Una, rather than Catholic and Jew. We have to be able to speak as equals and carry our own weight in that sense. More important, neighbors are responsible for each other. Leviticus 19 says, you shall reprove your neighbor, the Hebrew would be tochacha, complain if something's wrong here, or you will incur guilt yourselves. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what are the implications? We don't bear grudges. So we Jews are not to condemn today's Catholics for the sins of Catholics in the past, right? I don't think that's helpful. Nostra Aetate states that Catholics are not to hold all Jews responsible for what a few of us did 2,000 years ago. We come into the dialogue as individuals. Yes, we know our history, but that should not constrain us. Neighbors engage in tochacha, or rebuke, so that when correction is needed, we make it. I think that's helpful. For example, Exodus chapter 20 also says, as part of the Decalogue, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So we need changes in both Jewish and Christian education, as Phil already pointed out, because we are frequently bearing false witness against our neighbor in terms of textbooks and sermons and so on. And in Jewish education, we need more work, especially in day schools, and here I speak from the U.S. context, because we don't teach our Jewish children about Christianity, and that needs to be done as well. When it comes to tochacha and rebuke and avoiding bearing false witness, changes in the Catholic lectionary and liturgical readings would be helpful. Already in 1988, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops noted potential of some lectionary readings to bear false witness against Jews and Judaism. So if we know that there are problems, and the problems can be resolved, then to fail to correct them is inexcusable. Neighbors can help each other understand our distinct perspective. We're also better positioned to hear through each other's ears, because what might strike the insider as perfectly fine might sound horrible to the outsider. We already saw some events like that in this particular conference on Nostra Aetate. And that is why it is important for neighbors to speak with each other. When Catholic bodies that address Jews and Judaism make comments about Jews and Judaism, it would be nice if they had Jewish consultors to help them do it. And the same thing when Jewish bodies address the church and Christianity. Finally, hospitality helps make neighbors good. And we can see the hospitality offered as the Sisters of Zion years ago offered hospitality to me and have continued to do so, as the Cardinal Bea Center does, as the programs that Aldegonda sponsors do. That hospitality is important. Nostra Aetate opened the door to hospitality in a neighborly way. So may the doors of our houses continue to remain open so that we can continue to be good neighbors who protect each other, who learn from each other, who offer correction when correction is needed, and who appreciate not only what we share, but also how we differ. Neighbors live in different houses or different apartments, but they help each other. So may we as Jews and Christians, as neighbors, continue to be good neighbors, to keep watch for each other, and thereby go from strength to strength.
Thank you so much, Professor Levine. I think I'll go tonight home with so many good teachings. First of all, choosing the young brother, if I'm dating someone from a Jewish background, and choosing the sheep line. But thank you so much for all the insights you shared, for showing as well how this word neighbor, how it also took some different undertones in the Christian understanding, and we need to take that into consideration. And thank you for your last words on hospitality, so much needed today. So let's go to our last speaker of today before engaging in some I think very dense conversation after, because I really already see the tensions among the different contributions. Mary Boyce, who is already on the podium, is the Skinner and McAlpin Professor of Practical Theology at Union Theological Seminary, New York City, and also its former academic vice president and dean. She's the author of 7 books, editor or co-editor of 5 others, and numerous articles in books and journals. She currently chairs the Committee on Ethics, Religion, and the Holocaust at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and she's a board member of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary. Thank you so much, Professor Boyce.
Thank you, Elena. It is a privilege to be here in Rome with all of you from so many places. It's a privilege to be with my friends, some of whom I have known for a very long time, although I do think it was cruel of Phil to say that he was in grade school when Nostra Aetate came out. I was a postulant in Portland, Oregon at the time. We go back a long time together, he and I. I begin with a parable. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. The surprise of the mustard seed. Let us remember that Nostra Aetate was entirely unanticipated. When officials at the Vatican reach out to the various bishops throughout the world to solicit recommendations for the agenda of Vatican II, they received thousands and thousands of recommendations, but not a single one about the Church's relationship with Jews and Judaism. Not a single one. And yet, there were mustard seeds here and there. The memorandum from the Jesuits at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, from the Apeldoorn group, from other groups, small groups, that reached out to speak their perspective. And the most potent of all the mustard seeds was this meeting in June 1960 between Jules Isaac and Pope John. After the council, Cardinal Bea himself drew upon this parable of the mustard seed, referring to the meeting of Isaac and Pope John the 23rd. He said, and here I quote, that his hope was that the seed of this momentous encounter between the two might grow into that large mustard plant which warmly hosts in its branches so many men and women of non-Christian religions. Now, after the council, there were many commentators on the documents who sought to put Nostra Aetate in its place as a mere decree among all those grand constitutions, Lumen Gentium, Sacrosanctum Concilium, Dei Verbum, Gaudium et Spes. They could not possibly have anticipated the startling seeds, the startling acts of encounter and reconciliation that energize our gathering this week and many other gatherings before this, and I hope in the future. Since the council, many seeds of Nostra Aetate have proliferated. They have transgressed borders that were once well fortified with animosity and contempt. Shrubs of new understanding have grown, relationships, deep friendships have grown, and theological explorations opened a world of insight. So I invite you this evening to think of mustard seeds with which you are familiar and for which you can offer gratitude. I made a short list just to kind of prompt your own thinking. And first on my list, and I did not know that the General Council of the Sisters of Our Lady of Zion would be here, but when the council ended, they were already prepared. They had been sending sisters to study. They had opened study centers in some of the great cities of the world, like Rome and Paris and London and Sao Paulo. They committed themselves to the implementation of the council. They were ready, and they continue that 60 years on. I think of Abraham Joshua Heschel and his speech, "No religion is an island," that he gave at Union Theological Seminary on November 9th, 1965, 12 days after the affirmative vote of Nostra Aetate. No religion is an island. What a profound metaphor that he gave us that we still quote so many times today. And in that speech, he said that religious pluralism is the will of God. I don't imagine many other peoples were saying that, especially not rabbis or bishops and priests and so forth. And yet, here we are, 60 years on. I think of French bishops in 1987. I don't know any French bishops except the friend who was here tonight, but I think 1987 you weren't a bishop, to our loss. Jews pose questions to us Christians that touch on the heart of our faith. That is why dialogue is so powerful and to many threatening. I think of the many theologians and especially biblical scholars who have helped us to read our sacred texts in new ways. I was thinking specifically tonight of the great Swedish Lutheran bishop, Krister Stendahl, who was one of the first to recognize St. Paul not as the convert to Christianity, but as the apostle to the Gentiles. It is to Paul that I owe my faith in many ways. And later in his life, Krister Stendahl gave us another way of imagining our relations, and that when we meet somebody of a different religious tradition, ours is a relationship of holy envy, not of capturing and taking for our own that which is other, but of recognizing the holiness, and that we have a certain envy for it, a holy envy. I think of the many throughout the world who began, funded, and sustained research institutes, such as this Center for Cardlabea Center for Judaic Study, Chairs in Judaica, Interreligious Study, and then of those Jewish scholars and friends, living and dead, whose fidelity to the work of reconciliation continues to animate us. Now, of course, the parable, or its similitude, is hyperbolic. The mustard seed isn't the smallest of all seeds, and a shrub is hardly supreme among bushes. But even as this week we celebrate the astonishing advances in relations between Christians and Jews these 60 years, we also need to acknowledge that in how many places the seeds lie dormant. We are, I believe, at a mustard seed moment. Will the church, that for the first time in its history, urged its adherents to enter with prudence and charity into discussion and collaboration with peoples of other religions, will it revitalize this mandate? Will we collectively give our energies for that realization? We need to take the theological mustard seeds of Nostra Aetate, and particularly the mustard seeds of those documents that strengthen and refine Nostra Aetate, what I call its reception history. I have to say, as an American Catholic, those other documents that really give us a much fuller understanding of the relationship between Jews and Christians seems to be unknown among the clergy of the United States. It is my great sorrow that these documents fall into a kind of ground that doesn't have any tilling. So we might need to reframe Nostra Aetate in terms of an obligation of justice to those who differ from us religiously and culturally. We need to reframe it not as a recommendation, but as a mandate to address New Testament formulations that continue to serve as sources of contemptuous teachings. I have no doubt that those present here tonight have spent a considerable portion of our lives committed to the reinterpretation of texts. But among so many others, what we hear are interpretations of Scripture unaffected by Nostra Aetate, and especially by those documents that have extended its insights. I sense a reluctance to venture into reinterpretation, a resistance sometimes even to the vision of a church committed to a collaboration of religious traditions so that we might be, in the words of Pope Leo XIV, the yeast of unity in a world of fragmentation. So, to those here present, I say, let us resolve that we will take what we have learned, not simply in libraries, important as that is, but in years of dialogue and in great moments of holiness in experience of friendship, that we will intensify the proliferation and strength of the seeds of just relations between our communities. Dare we hope, Jules Isaac asked Pope John the 23rd. Yes, and I believe you may hope for even more, the Pope responded. They both plowed new ground. At ages 83 and 79, in earlier years, I used to talk about the meeting of these elderly men. I repent of that. But may this week's remembrance, analysis, and celebration of Nostra Aetate re-energize us all, giving us new energy for planting and nurturing seeds of knowledge, intensified collaboration, and hope for a time in which we Jews and Christians and peoples of other religious traditions, Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs, enough agnostics and atheists, that we will spread mustard seeds with deliberation, imagination, daring, and strategic perseverance. That's what we women know. May healthy shrubs proliferate, welcoming not simply the birds of the air, but all who aspire to live into the vision of Nostra Aetate says, the hidden power that hovers over all things. May we keep this hope alive together.